Welcome guys to a new video Team Crushing the Meta. Today we're going to talk over certain ideas we have for the OverDress, of course, and today we're going to talk with Harv from Team Crushing the Meta and me with me is Dave. So what are we going to talk about, Harv?
Well, as you have seen maybe from the last episode of Crazy Game Changing, there we have talked about certain things that we have in Vanguard OverDress. And one of the things that changed the way that we play the game is of course having a right deck, because as you guys may know, that changed the way that you build your deck. It also changed the deck you mulligan in your starting hand, because you'll be searching for certain units and not for certain grades. In today's video, we will talk about shield value, because we know the game as maybe from V, and some units as in their grades have different shield value than they have right now. So today we have me and Dave, of course, will be talking about this, explaining to you guys the difference, the way that you play the game, because now you have different shield value.
Yeah.
In the next episode, we will talk about arts and also the cleanse now going into nations. But yeah, let's get back to this video.
Yeah, because we have, as we may know, we have of course the grade 1s that are being reverted back to grade, or not grades, but reverted to 5k shields. And we have of course the triggers being all streamlined to being 15k shields defensively. So we don't have any more 20k shield heal triggers of course, but we still have the 5k draw triggers. So that's the only thing we have right now, but for the rest, grade 1s are back to being the 5k shield units, and that's how it has been back in the G era of course. And for G era players that played in those moments know that we played very aggressively with those pieces, because what we often did is in the early game we just put them down as 5k units that have 7k power and then just try to rush your opponent with it.
Yeah, what Dave is trying to say is that the way you rush is kind of different.
Yeah.
Like when we play in V, when you normally boost a grade 3 with a grade 1, you will have that 13 plus 8, you'll have the 21 column. But 21 column hitting into a grade 2 means that your opponent would have to guard with 15k more if they are sitting on 10k. But when you attack into a grade 3, which is a 12 or a 13k, it's actually only a 10k shield, which means it's 5k more than what it originally was when you attack with 13 on 13. So what you create right here is you put a grade 1 on the field, which you lose 10k shield from your hand, but for opponent it's just a 5k shield. When you boost a grade 2, then you actually make a bigger difference if that grade 2 is a 10k, because you're hitting 18 on their 13, which means your opponent would have to give a 10k shield. The 10k shield equals the 10k shield that you just put from your hand on the field, because your opponent would have to guard with way more than what you have put on the table, especially if you put it early, which every turn that power counts. And yeah, we will be talking about OverDress right here. We'll not go into premium because that would be a different, whole different formula.
Yeah, because premium is a wide open format of course, and we have like 8 years of content for it that we can talk over it about. But for today we will just be talking about OverDress of course, and how it will be different from the V era, since those two are compared very well.
Compare the one to the other.
Yeah, definitely.
Like we have V as its own format, and we have D its own format, and the formats will never cross. But we could talk about this format comparing to that format, because most of us actually played V and not all of us played G. And for you guys that are new into the games, so you actually only played OverDress, it's also very interesting to know how it was in V. So the first unit that we'll talk about, Dave, is of course the grade 2s.
Yeah.
Did the grade 2 become different in their shield value?
No, I don't. They haven't changed in the amount of shield value they have, but I think they have become more important than ever. Since back in the V era, of course, we had a lot of 15k shield units and our 10k grade 1 units on our hand, and we had a lot of diversity to guard with. But now that we have less shield value on the hand, we need to rely more on having interceptors onto the field to guard with. So let's say for example your opponent is guarding for those 28k columns, you need to decide, do I want to intercept with my 15k shield from hand of course, to make those numbers big enough to guard against that. And I think in that situation, the 5Ks of the interceptors are becoming more important than ever. And of course, because of the whole persona right mechanic, I think those units already getting power from themselves. So having more shield value in the form of intercepting is just nice in overall state.
It's actually something that we didn't really use that much in D. That's intercepting from the field. A lot of people, when they actually need that extra 5K, they will be struggling like, oh, what should I discard? And then sometimes you are playing a friendly match and you say, you could just intercept, right? And they would be like, yes, I could actually do that. But because it was just a 5K shield, we had a quick shield, we had throw triggers, we had so much units that had more shield value than you need on that attack, so you actually almost never intercepted. And the units that you had on the field, most of the time you actually wanted to keep them, so you will never really intercept with them. And now you kind of have to, because you will never get the shield value, because in D we don't have enough shield value comparing it to D. D to D.
Yeah, that's entirely true, of course, and often we overguarded for certain cards, so we just decide, okay, just throw down a 15k shield sometimes when you need to guard for a 5k, since if you're playing DI or certain other clans, you just had those immense value grade 2s that you wanted to protect against, so this, or just intercepting with those 5k units wasn't that valuable compared to now in the D format, of course, where shield value is less and we need to work around certain numbers, such as the 33 mark, where we need to intercept to make those perfect numbers, of course.
And also, that's one thing that we get back into the other video that we talked about in episode 1, where we talked about deck building. Now, if you talk about the D format, the grade 2s in general are becoming better and better, because originally the grade 1s in V had more shield value. So you sometimes build your deck with more grade 1s more than grade 2s, because the grade 1s also just had shield value, so it's good. But now the grade 2s are actually better, because you could put them on the field, you could attack with them, and later on you could intercept with them, and next turn you could put a new one. While when you put grade 1s on the field, they always be in the back row. Yes, you could move them up, but you could never intercept with them, so the shield value that you gave up will never come back, although it's only 5k as they've said.
And of course in the V format we had some very powerful grade 1s, so even though certain cards had 10k shield, certain effects such as maybe Laurel from Dimension Police or certain other cards are just so valuable that we wanted to put them down. But now in the D format we also have PGs back into our grade 1 spot, so we also have those to guard against, and not having that 10k shield is, I think, not that big of a problem, just because we have the PG taking it over and the 5k shield difference isn't that big compared to V format.
And what you also have right here is, as they've said, the perfect guards. The introducement of the perfect guards being grade 1 again is on one hand really good, because you don't really have to play a certain amount of grade 1s, because you always have your right deck to ride with. But on the other hand, the perfect guard is very important in D, because it's one of the few ways to guard everything, because we can see the power shifting, right? Because with Persona Right, we have seen from the Yu deck, the first starter deck, the power that deck actually creates is immense. Like sometimes you make such a huge columns. When we talk about the second starter deck, which is the one from the Dark State, also like the gear juggernaut.
Definitely.
It gets plus 15k just like that. And remember that that's normally also the turn that you Persona Right. So that's 25k shield. Power, I mean 25k power plus the original 13. That's 38. That attacks twice.
And without a booster even. That's even more insane, because then it can even be 46, or maybe with the units that gain 5k power for 51. And you have to guard you have to guard against it twice, because it gets reset.
How the hell do you want to guard a 38 attacking unit? You need two triggers. You need two 15k triggers. And if you have only one 15k trigger, that you put out there, then you need 3 more units to put with it. So you're losing 4 cards to guard 1 attack. That's huge.
Yeah.
So the perfect guard's actually becoming very good. Especially we have the new perfect guards. So they also have a skill. If you have 2 cards in your hand, being the last 2 cards being 2 perfect guards, you can guard with 1, you don't lose a card, and then you can guard with the second, and you don't lose a card. So you'll be like 2 perfect guards in hand, and you could guard 2 attacks. I mean, they thought about that, but you see that the perfect guards are becoming way more, I would not say useful, but viable.
Yeah, definitely. And when we look back at the V era, of course, we were very luxurious with the amount of shield value we had, and I think even Bushiroad noticed that because they made a lot of units having those sentinel restrictions, right? And they just decided, okay, many players are guarding with those 15k shields and they have the luxury for it, so we need to make skills that use those 15k shields from hand, of course. But I think now in the D format, I think we will be seeing less sentinel restricting guards, for now at least, because we have so less shield value compared to the V format, of course. The shift on how Bushiroad is making those cards are also how they designed the amount of shield value each trigger and Grade 1 has, of course, because we'll be seeing less units that get those sentinel restrictions, of course.
Yeah, exactly what Dre is trying to say. I could give you also a good example of that. Is very early in V, we had Dragonic Overlord with Waterfall. Right? And what we actually did is on the first ride, they went into Dragonic Overlord. And when they attacked, you normally just use your perfect guard because you know later on in the game you will not use it because there will be Waterfall and you would rather keep your heals, your triggers, crits and front to guard that attack. So what you normally did is you guarded early on with your perfect guard, although the Overlord was only 33, right? With his skill and 1 fourth marker. And 33 is not that easy to guard, but still you would rather perfect guard and keep the high Grade 1s, your triggers for the later attack of the Waterfall. And yes, that is just exactly right what Dave trying to say. Is now you see that the perfect guards are cards that you really want to save for the right attack because you only have 4 of. And yes, you have your triggers, but even the heal trigger is less value. So you have to be very smart about when you use the perfect guard.
Yeah, definitely. And just for me at least, I think having the purpose back of having a perfect guard, because just roughly perfect guarding for the sake of perfect guarding feels a little redundant to me when you're looking at how a perfect guard works, right? Because the effect of a perfect guard is to perfect guard an attack, but if you cannot like use any sentinels, then what does a perfect guard mean, right? Like, okay, yeah, you can guard any attack, but you can't. So yeah. But of course we have the new orders also, and that's also a new trick we have to our arsenal, because order cards from itself don't have any shield value, as we know, right? But they bring some very generic effects. So let's say, for example, we have the one from Stoicheia that's called Called by the Beast or something like that.
It's skill giving you the shield value. When you have the deck, you actually need cards in the deck that give you a little bit more of the shield value. And in V, we actually didn't appreciate that. Like, we have that Pilwin unit that gave you so much shield value when you guard, I think, from your hand. And we were like, yeah, it's a good shield value. And if we had skills like this, like you have the Grade 2 right here, the one also from Stoicheia, like it could get more power, right? If this attacks on your Vanguard, then normally that would be only a 5k shield to guard, right? But
definitely.
Let's say, for an example, this unit is boosted by a Grade 1. It becomes 1823, right? So you need 15k shield. If you don't have trigger on hand, that 15k shield is 3 units, right? So right here we have the order card, and the order card could give you 15k shield. So you can see how much value an order card like this actually give you.
And I think that because we have this order card, we now have more meaning of having higher impact shield units, of course, because when we look back at V format, of course, if we got a 50k shield grade 2 or something like that, we were just like, why the hell do we need it, of course, because we have so many shield value. And now we got an order card with 15k shield and we're thinking like, oh, that's great, we have more shield value to our arsenal and we have more options. So you also have a very different aspect of how you look at certain cards, just because how the format shifted, of course.
A very good example of that is, of course, also the grade 2s that we have right now. Indeed, that with a Counterblast of 1, you get 5k more shield.
Yeah.
If that was in V, we would laugh. Even in the starter deck, we were like, a Counterblast for 5k shield? Nah, I would just play one extra grade 1. It has a 10k shield. Why would I play a grade 2 but would get only 5k shield more, and I need to pay a Counterblast or a Soul Blast for that?
Yeah, and of course we in the V format we also had those vanillas that were 10k shield and 10k base, so we were already laughing at that at the beginning of V format, and now we're thinking like, okay, since the importance of intercepting has become even greater, having those extra 5k shield on those interceptors is just really nice. And I think that's why they made those cards, of course, because they definitely knew we would like them for how less shield value we have right now.
Also, a very good example is that most of the time that Counterblast does explain how. Because sometimes when they attack you, what you will do, you only need 10k shield, right? But you could not give 10k shield because that's two very important units. So what you give is a 15k shield as a net trigger. Okay? So what will happen right there is they attack you, only need 10k shield, but you give up 15 because you'll be overguarding because you don't want to use two important units. So when you intercept with that unit, you pay one Counterblast, and that Counterblast actually saves you a trigger on hand, which is a 15k shield. So sometimes that extra Counterblast that you pay isn't only 5k shield, but actually it's 10k shield more, because if you didn't have that, you would have overguarded with a trigger from hand, because you would not be wasting two important units being grade 1 or a grade 2, just like that. So the fact that we don't have 10k shields, we have 5, and then we jump into 15 right away, right? We don't have 10k shields, means that you will be put in situations that, will I waste 5k shield because I overguard, or will I intercept and put a grade 1 from hand, but I really don't want to lose that grade 1. So you will have to choose. So giving us the 10k shield is really good, and still paying a Counterblast or a Soul Blast for it, even with that, I think it's really nice to introduce that to the game.
Yeah, definitely, and just because how simplistic the game is just right now, I think paying a Counterblast and Soul Blast is just fine, just as we see with the trial decks, of course, and how those boss units from the set are coming out. We don't really have units that use a lot of resources just yet, so for now paying those Counterblasts is just fine, but I think definitely that in the future we will evolve on how certain cards will work with the amount of shield value they get. Maybe we get, for example, if you went into Final Rush last turn, you get an extra 5k shield or a 10k shield. Maybe we'll be adapting to that, or maybe a new mechanic. Maybe with Stargate they say, okay, you have so many units imprisoned right now, you get extra shield value, as we see with the grade 1, of course. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And what also is very nice is you think about vanillas. We haven't seen any vanillas yet. Also, if you think about back in the days, the grade 2s vanillas that we had didn't have extra shield value. The only thing that they had extra is 1k more. So when they introduced vanillas in the V series, all the vanillas had extras, or they had more shield value, or they had more attack, or they had boost, or instead of having boost they had intercept as the grade 1s. We have seen different kind of vanillas, but when we see the grade 2 that say pay a cost to get 5k shield more, it doesn't make sense that we will also have a grade 2 that is a vanilla that has 5k shield. That doesn't make any sense. So just by having that card, Wishroad actually already gave away that if we will have vanillas in the future, maybe those vanillas will not have that extra shield value. So maybe we will not have vanilla. We don't know yet for sure, but I can give you that, I think we could give you that it will not be that simple, that you have a grade 2 vanilla, which is a 10k shield and a 10k power. I don't think it would be like that.
No, definitely not. And just when we looked at it, of course, with the whole vanilla mechanic, it just felt bland. And now we have with the Counterblast, we have the option to pay it for. And we have the option to get it for the extra shield value. So it's also to the own personal player to decide, do I want to invest those resources instead of, okay, it's just tanky shield. Because if it were tanky shield base, and you also need just to guard for 5k, maybe you feel a little bit, but then I will just overguard. And now with paying a Counterblast, you have the option to pay it for, and you feel, you don't feel it like you're overguarding with it. No, you're feeling like just, oh, I didn't pay the cost for it. Yeah.
And now we get into the triggers. So we know that the critical trigger will have 15k shield, the same as the fronts. And we also know that the draw triggers will basically have the 5k shield, which it still is good because the draw trigger already give you an extra card, so the 5k shield is good. And we know that the heal trigger went back to 15k and not 20. So I don't have any issues with this basically, but what I did like in V is that because the heal triggers were 20k, you could sometimes try to force a heal trigger out of your opponent's hand, meaning you could greed the opponent's hand. Because if you attack with a 28k attack, then basically your opponent would be like, I just guard with the heal trigger and I'm taking out 33 or 32 and I'm good, or just 30. And now they actually would have to put a 15k shield and a 5k. Being a crit, a front, or heal, it doesn't make any difference. So for that, that's one thing that I dislike a little bit. I actually liked the heal having a different shield value than the crit and the front, because sometimes you could read out of your opponent's hand, does they have a heal, which means they have so much heals left in their deck.
Yeah, definitely. But when we look at, for example, the draw trigger, those are just really nice overall now in the current state, of course, because we have those right decks. So if we go into the early game and we say we get a draw trigger onto our drive to card damage check, we draw an extra card, and maybe it will be a piece, maybe it will be a 10k, and then we can discard the draw triggers, of course, for our right deck, and then we can just put down the unit we draw into, maybe a grade 1, maybe a grade 2, and just play some pressure with it, of course. And having those important draw triggers is still important nowadays, even though they have less shield value. But since the introduction of the right deck, of course, we have certain ways to discard those. And as we have seen in V era, we have some certain decks that play draw triggers, but those were decks that often discarded those draw triggers for certain effects. When you just look like Blade Master, when you look at Coney Jack in the past, where you didn't have to Ribble, of course. But now, since every deck has a right deck, the importance from draw triggers has also grown up. So yeah, in that aspect, draw triggers are just still fine, even though we didn't have draw PGs for now.
Yeah, exactly. There's other thing that also makes a huge difference. It's something that I already talked with Dave about, and normally in V, let's talk about V, when you drive check, get the triggers, then you have already a stronger attacking turn, right? Because if you have a front and a heal, you already go back on damage, so you could take one more, but you also have 15 and 20, so 35k shield more than you would normally have. So drive checking E grade 1 and E grade 2 means 15k shield, but drive checking 2 criticals mean 30k shield. So there is a big difference in shield value when you drive check a trigger. So the luck factor is big, right, in V. But how about D? Well, now it's even bigger. Why? Because there is a bigger cap between the shield value that the triggers have with the shield value that your normal units have. Because, let's give an example again. You're playing V, and your drive check gives you 2 great ones. And then the other drive check give you 2 critical triggers, or a crit and a heal. The amount of shield value almost doubled. But when we go back and we talk about D, if you get 2 great ones and you get 2 criticals, then the amount of shield value tripled, because you went from 10 to 30. So having triggers during your drive check, or even the damage check, because the 10k power is still the same, is actually way more lucky than it was in V. So that's one thing that I have a little bit of, let's say, I dislike about D, is if you don't drive check, if you play a whole game and your drive check is nothing, then you would basically be in such a disadvantage even with your guarding hand. And some others would say, okay, but if you don't drive check your triggers, and what you will drive checking is good units. Yes, agree. Units that you could attack with, units that you could make a nice combo with, but you will lose defensively.
Yeah, definitely. And that was also a big concern when we went into the V format, of course, like 3 years ago. We were already talking about the fact that triggers gain a lot more importance in certain decks or in certain games. But now with what D format is looking like, it got even more importance than that. So what we're concerned with like 3 years ago has been becoming even a bigger issue in our regard, of course. And I think Bushiroad needs to think about that when they want to look into certain cards. They cannot just roughly print units that gain a lot of power but don't do anything defensively, of course, because we just need those cards that gain a little bit of shield value, just as the great one from Stargate, of course, because we still need those shield values. Because if you're going into a Bruce turn, of course, with 51k Colossus and everything like that, and you just try to check into the 2 great ones, yeah, cool for you that you just got immensely powerful units on your hand, but you will die the next turn, so you can't use them. So that's also a counter factor of that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we actually, I didn't want to talk about right away when we saw the shield value and the amount of power that the triggers have, but we wanted to test it first. Test it against V, test it against D, have 2 D decks against each other, and the conclusion that I've got is you have those huge attackers, like it's immense the amount of power that those units get, versus the no shield value that you have. Your hand doesn't have any shield value. So if they give us units that could get shield value, that's really good. Those units, you need to grab them and put them in your deck because you really need them. And you will come to the same conclusion when you start playing the game. You could not just put a trigger on the field and think, I could boost with this. Or you could not just discard a 15k shield to ride into something. You will really need that 15k shield. What you also will find yourself doing is on the first attack or second attack that they do, you will be guarding for those no pass, because if you take a crit to the face that early, sometimes you will not recover, because it could that 15k shield that you kept in your hand will save you 2 damage. So you have to be very smart about how to play the game and what you discard and what not, and also the way that you build your deck. But you'll sometimes be having those units that you have on the field that cost you a Counterblast or a Soul Blast for just 5k shield, and you will be really valuing those units because that will make a huge difference throughout the game.
Yeah, definitely. And just having less luxury in the amount of how do I want to guard this certain attacks, because in the V format, as we have talked earlier about, we had more combination. We can say, okay, put down a 10k shield, a 5k shield and a 15k shield, and we got a 30k total shield amount, right? But now in the whole D format, if we want to get into the 30k shield amount, we have to put down 2 triggers or 6 great ones or 6 great 2s, or it's just too big. So we have less diversity, but I think it's also a positive point, because maybe we were just spoiled in V format, of course. That's also a possibility, and now we have to make certain decisions. Do I want to keep my great one on hand, or don't I? Or do I just want to put it into the field? You have to make those certain decisions, and in V we just made the decision we will just discard the 10k shield or the 50k shield, of course, and it's just easy.
I think what people are actually wanting is that the shield value of the trigger will go back to the 10k. Because if that was the case, if your shield value of your triggers, the critical trigger, is 10k instead of 15, then the difference will become less. But now, because there is such a huge difference between the guarding value of having a trigger and a normal unit, that's when people having, let's say, trouble with. But what I do like is the same as you said, is they introduced those normal units that gain shield value very early in D. In D, because they knew that without them, you will have some struggles. So imprisoning your opponent's units doesn't only give you a good attacking turn, but it also gives you a good defensive turn. So they are working with the mechanic the right way, in my eyes, to have a strong attacking turn, to have a strong defensive turn, and to make the player who is piloting the deck becomes better as a player, because they need to be smart about guarding, they need to be smart about which units they are discarding, the way that they guard, and also it's hunting them back later on in the stages of the game.
Yeah.
There is one more thing that we could talk about. It's of course the Overtrigger. So this badass boy makes, of course, a huge difference.
Yeah.
It acts as an extra heal trigger, right? It also makes a huge attacking turn that you could go through everything. But defensively is also good, because if you damage check this during the turn that your opponent is attacking with, let's say, Stokeia, and they could make 6 attacks, right? Or during the final rush turn that you could make also like 5 attacks. If the first attack and it's discard, then you would be like, how the hell could I go through this except me drive checking also on Overtrigger to go through that? So what's your take on the Overtrigger, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's the ultimate factor of luck, and people can get, of course, and certain players will get more value out of them just because they are more luckier to certain degrees. But let's say, for example, you're playing against a deck that can reset a lot of units. If you can just abuse this as hell, right? If you're playing an Aquaforce deck in the back in the day and you just put this on a Tidal Assault, then it can just screw your opponent big time. But now in the D format,
Great Nature, same.
Yeah.
Great Nature, Aquaforce.
Yeah, but now in D, as we can see for now, we don't have those units that restand on themselves. They restand after the Vanguard attack, so they cannot abuse this type of trigger twice. So I think that is a good idea perspective, of course, but it's still what is like 100 million power or something like that, and your opponent you're just asking your opponent, do you have a PG to guard against this?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it's still 1 damage. It's doable.
Yeah.
Even if it's 100 million damage or 100 million power, your opponent can still decide, okay, I will just take this attack and take, for example, and guard, for example, a higher attack that's around the 51k mark or something like that. You still have options, and it's not like in the D format that your opponent always playing a rush deck. You're not playing a vanilla deck. You're not playing a high tempo Overlord to cross deck for now, of course, because most decks are late turn 3 or turn 4, and in the early game you're not getting pushed to 4 damage, so you have the luxury of taking a damage when they get the Overtrigger early.
Well, the thing is, when it comes to the Overtrigger, there are, of course, will always be some nations, some clans that will have more advantage of having the Overtrigger in their deck than others. And we will not get into premium because that needs a whole video by itself.
Yeah.
But when we talk about D, the value of the Overtrigger becomes very different if you play a deck that is very Vanguard centric, or a deck that could do more damage in one attack than deck that could do multiple damage in multiple attacks. Because if you play Stokeia, let's say for an example, then you'll be attacking with lots of small attacks. So if your opponent gets an Overtrigger in their damage, then that basically shuts your turn down. But if you're playing a deck that your Vanguard gets 2 more criticals and lots of amount of power, and you attack, so you have everything in one attack, let's say Dimension Police alike deck, which we also have as in Stargate, and you get one more drive check, and let's say you drive check 2 criticals, and you do your opponent 3 damage. Even if they get the Overtrigger, yes, they do heal 1, but they have to take the other 2 attacks because the turn doesn't stop there. So it is actually very different from the one nation to another, or from the one unit to another, or just from the one deck to another. Some decks will definitely have more value of it, some decks will have less value of it, and it depends on the situation. If you get your Overtrigger on the first damage, like the first damage on your grade 1 turn, then yes, you've just wasted it.
Yeah, definitely.
But when you draw it, it's actually not that bad, because it's still a 50k shield. And it does go to the drop zone if you guard with it, right?
Yeah.
So if there is a way to put it from the drop zone back to your deck, you can actually use it again. Drive check it, damage check it, or draw it. But if you damage check it, or if you drive check it, then it just goes away. So from the one deck to another, there will be some decks that have more advantage of it. There are also some decks that could actually take lots of cards from their deck, right? So let's say Nubatama or Morokumo maybe. Morokumo a light deck that could take out certain units, normal units from their deck, which will make the chance higher of you drive checking or damage checking this. Those decks will also have more advantage out of the Overtrigger.
Yeah, but I think for now the gap between decks that gain a lot of value from the Overtrigger, of course, and less value, from the Overtrigger is just, it's small for now. We don't have units that we send on themselves for 2 to 3 times. We don't have certain cards that go for very high criticals. We don't have any cards that go for extra criticals right now, I think. And for that, I think the Overtrigger for now is just fine, and it's just an extra heal trigger and just something people can excite for when it goes off the right way, of course. But it can be, but it can feel very salty if you just get it into your opening hand, or maybe even get it on your first drive check when your opponent is like, okay, I will no guard this deck.
Yeah, there are 2 ways to see this. You could get very salty about it, and you could be mad, and you could see it more as a fun factor, because this is an extra wow factor, right? You will be having, oh damn, he PG'd. If you didn't PG, you would lose. It also makes the PGs better. But if not, you will be like 2 to pass, or you'd be like no pass, and then your opponent gets an Overtrigger, and you'd be like, oh shit, that's pass, and it makes it on the one hand more fun. But when you get into a very competitive play, you will just have to make do with there is an Overtrigger, and you can't get mad because that's the way the game is played. You don't like it, play V.
Yeah, definitely. We also still have the premium format where we can play with a lot of other cards other than the Overtriggers, of course. And I think there are even more gimmicky types of decks that can do even more than having just one Overtrigger in your deck. So in that aspect, it doesn't really matter that much, I think.
Yeah. So that's it actually for us. We talked about the different amount of shield, the way that will actually affect the game. There's of course more to talk about, because there will also be more units in the future, which also Bushiroad will introduce different units with different shield values. But all in all, I think that Bushiroad did make an interesting choice with us valuing that shield value more, and not being like overguarding or throwing so many cards. You'll be like, oh, you're attacking with that much power, I will just put 2 great ones. No, you can't do that anymore, because those 2 great ones are right now 4 great ones. You will not give up 2 units, 4 units. That's a huge difference. That's double the amount of cards that you have in your hand. So all in all, it's interesting to see more from OverDress, and I really like the shift between the amount of shield that we have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the way Bushiroad talked about it with the Blitz orders, of course, and they thought about it, I think they also noticed for themselves that they needed to do something against it, and they that they need to make more Blitz orders, of course, for it, of course. But if you like this video, I would highly recommend comment down below for your own ideas on this subject, of course. And if you want to stay up to date with our content, we also have our Facebook page where we posting regularly on certain new cards that come out, or maybe even videos that come out, or we make just a poll on what people think about certain ideas, of course. So if you haven't subscribed to this channel, I would highly recommend to subscribe down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Bye.